my fellow Australians need to know this, the whole world is aware that in New South Wales, when the Israeli flag was splashed across the Opera House, there were hideous protests. We had certain people running around saying, gas the Jews. I'll come back to that in a moment. All sorts of hate language for which, in any other context, you'd have been dragged off in your pajamas and taken to jail.
Have any of them been arrested?
Not that I'm aware of as I sit here. I'm not absolutely current, but I don't think so.
I haven't heard of it.
And then you had, Senior Oman saying there are tears flowing down my face with joy that this has been launched.
Why doesn't he get chucked out of Australia?
Well, it's a good question.
Send him to Gaza.
Let's see what happens.
Send him to Gaza. He can have tears streaming down his face in Gaza.
Let's explore some of this a little bit more. One of the things that Henry Ergas wrote in The Australian, now he's a top-class mind. I've never known a man so deeply steeped in learning as he is. He made a really interesting observation. He said, the Nazis had sufficient sense of shame to try and hide what they were doing when they were gassing the Jews and shooting them, dropping them into trenches. Now we're prepared to side with people who don't even have a sense of shame about the butchering of women and children.
Yesterday I watched the raw footage, about an hour of the...
How did you bring yourself to do that?
I was invited to see the raw footage from the 7th of October massacres, and I've seen quite a lot in war zones I've covered, in the flesh as well as in sometimes being shown video of atrocities. I think what I saw yesterday is by some margin worse than anything I've seen before. And I've been in Nigerian villages when a suicide bomber goes into the church on a Sunday and blows everyone up. And then people chase people through the fields shooting them. I've seen enough exit wounds from children's bodies. But the footage of the 7th of October is a level of depravity that, yes, not even the Nazis did. Because the whole time they're massacring, and I think the film was we saw about 10% of all the bodies that Hamas, the people that Hamas killed that day. Throughout the whole thing, the Hamas fighters are in a state of utter elation. Utter elation.
Were the Nazis in a state of utter elation as they gassed the Jews?
Even the descriptions of the Einsatzgruppen, who were shooting Jews in the back of the head in trenches, to fall into trenches, grave pits that they'd made the Jews dig for themselves. Even when you read the accounts, both from the very, very few survivors and from those who witnessed it and those who partook in it, say that the soldiers had to actually be, weirdly enough, protected from their acts by getting incredibly drunk in the evenings and trying to forget what they'd been made to do. The Hamas terrorists are utterly elated and delighted by what they're doing. I said this yesterday, but I really don't want to hear Allahu Akbar shouted again on my streets. It's a war cry. The Hamas terrorists are shouting Allahu Akbar all the way through, as they are using a shovel to decapitate a young man. With every blow of the shovel, they shout Allahu Akbar. When they go in to rape and murder all these young women in a room, they're shouting Allahu Akbar the whole time. When they find a young woman hiding under a table, pretending to be dead, and they realize she's alive, and they begin killing her, they're shouting Allahu Akbar all the time. And they're so elated. And they phone home. We've got the telephone calls now. They phone home. One disgusting young Hamas guy shouts from the phone of one of his victims, his father in Gaza, saying, "I have killed with my own hands 10 Jews. Your son has killed 10 Jews." And the mother is put on the phone and they're all shouting Allahu Akbar and they're so proud of him.
Indescribable.
That's what we're facing. And so when the world sees hundreds of thousands of Muslims marching against Israeli actions in the Gaza, they either agree with what Hamas did and like it, and an awful lot do. We have an awful lot of predominantly Muslims in Australia, Britain, Europe, America, who like what I've just described. They're on board with it, and they'd like to do it to the 7 to 8 million Israelis. So people either like that and want it, or they're totally ignorant of this, or they think that in the wake of that, the Israelis should just simply sit back, take it. And I don't think...
Or if they must respond, it should be proportional.
Which, as I always say, as I said in the week since the massacre, would mean that the Israelis should go in and, for instance, take a shovel and behead a young Palestinian man for every Israeli man. Do they really think? Does anyone really think that's what would happen? That would be proportional. Proportional would be a group of Israeli soldiers finding precisely the number of young women in the Gaza that the Palestinians found in the south of Israel, and raping precisely the same number of women, and then abducting them into Israel and spitting on their bodies and much more.
And rounding up a 6-year-old boy. And
that's not what the Israelis are going to do. That's not what they're doing. Besides which, and I have to say this, I'm so fed up of the double standards on all of this. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in the last 12 years by Bashar al-Assad and other Muslims in the civil war in Syria. There's no one on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne. There's no one on the streets of London. We have seen hundreds of thousands of people killed in the last decade in Yemen, Muslims being killed. There's no one on the streets of Melbourne. Nobody is standing outside the Sydney Opera House calling gas the Hutu, or gas the Houthi, gas the Shia, gas the... Nobody's marching for the dead Muslims in Yemen. Their co-religionists, we're always told about, care so much about their co-religionists, don't give a damn about their co-religionists. They really don't. Muslims do not love other Muslims. They have no love for them. They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None. If they had any, the Jordanians would have taken in the West Bank Palestinians. The Egyptians would have taken in the territory they used to run, the Gaza, and own the Gaza, and they would have taken in the Palestinians from the Gaza. Why have the Egyptians made sure that not one Palestinian is allowed to leave Gaza? Why do they make sure that their border wall is tough as anything? What do they mind? One thing: Jews living. Jews living and Jews winning. It hits them deep in their soul, in their psyche. It's an ancient, ancient hatred. Perhaps the most ancient among the monotheisms. And the deepest and the ugliest, the nastiest, and the one that has been least addressed. And we've imported it.
Part of that importation, you've touched on it. Another ABC or BBC type sort of anguishing question was, don't we have to differentiate between the moderates and the extremists? To which I'm afraid my response must be, well, show some courage, moderates.
Sure.
Stand up, condemn this. Have you seen any of that in Britain?
Not much. Quite a lot of so-called moderate Muslims that I've known in the UK over the years, including very good friends of mine, always split when it comes to the issue of Israel being involved in anything.
But Israel and, you can criticize Israel without being anti-Jewish, they say.
Yeah, not really. Not really, I think. I mean, you can criticize it, but to only criticize Israel. I mean, as we sit here, roughly the same population of Gaza is being forcibly moved by the government of Pakistan, almost 2 million Muslims are being moved by the Pakistani authorities into Afghanistan. Okay, we have a very large Pakistani community here in the UK. If their country of origin can do that, why can't we? If it comes to that, if it has to come to that. Why does nobody notice this? Why is nobody saying this is an appalling war crime by the Pakistani government? Well, only because there are so many Pakistani politicians and others in the UK and other countries who have a deep connection to their country of origin and would never want to see it looked at in a bad way. They will not criticize that. They haven't said a word about that. No, I think that if you are zooming in on Israel, lambasting Israel, and are basically not bothered with everything else in the world, you're not motivated by anything other than being anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. Of course, and it just has to be said. I mean, I've said this so many times that I tire myself with it, but it's necessary to say anti-Semitism is a shapeshifter. It's a shape-shifting virus. It can come from anywhere. At times in the past, it was the case that people didn't like Jews because they were seen to be a different religion and strange and different, and so they were hated for their religion. Then after the wars of religion, you couldn't hate anyone for their religion, so people started to hate the Jews for their race. Then after the Holocaust, you couldn't hate people because of their race anymore, so people hated the Jews because of their nation. On and on. It's always been like that.
We might come back to that in a moment. There's a question I want to ask you. In this, we had the call for proportionality, and then we call for pause for humanitarian purposes. We're both deploring atrocities against human beings. But I just wonder how much sympathy can be extended to the Palestinian people who have not only harboured, perhaps sometimes at the point of a gun, they've not only harboured Hamas, they've voted for them, they've supported them.
Yeah, well,
can they really be excused for blame for what they've helped bring on themselves? Or am I being unfair?
No, I don't think they can be. The people of Gaza, let's just stick with the Gazans for now. The people of Gaza voted in Hamas. Hamas came in and they killed their counterparts in the Palestinian Authority, shot them in the back and threw them off buildings. So again, the Hamas have no care for their fellow Palestinians. They treat their lives as nothing. The Israelis treat the lives of Palestinians much better than Hamas do.
That's a really important point that's overlooked. Just brushed aside.
Yeah. Everything's brushed aside. That's
there were
important.
17 members of the Israeli parliament, can't pronounce
Knesset,
who were Arab.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where are the Jews
Arab
embedded
judges?
in Arabic nations' governments?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and let's get to the one of the chants we've heard across our cities in recent weeks: from the river to the sea.
Yeah.
From the river to the sea means, and again, most people can't even point to it on a map, and many non-Muslims wouldn't know what they were talking about as they were saying that chant. But the river is River Jordan, the sea is the Mediterranean. If so-called Palestine is from the river to the sea, that means the eradication of the Jewish state.
So is this Israel's war, or is it in fact our war as well?
It's the world's war. It's a civilized world's war. It's a civilized world's war for many reasons. One is, we've had chants on the streets of London in recent days for intifada. We've had intifada in this country. We had it on our tubes and buses in 2005. We had it when a car bomb was placed outside a nightclub down the road from here in 2007. We had it when drummer Lee Rigby was beheaded in broad daylight in 2013 in London. We had it when a suicide bomber went into the Manchester Arena in 2017 and blew up 23 young girls with a suicide vest. We had intifada on the streets of London, on Westminster Bridge, on Tower Bridge, London Bridge, when we had people rushing across London Bridge with knives, shouting Allahu Akbar, again, this war cry, while slitting the throat of a pregnant woman. We've had intifada on our streets. Anyone who thinks intifada stops in Israel is a fool. It comes to Australia, Britain, and everywhere else too. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to decide whether or not we have any courage to stand up for ourselves as a civilization. And if somebody says, our plan is to rid the world of Jews, as Hamas want to do, then I'm sorry, we have to tap into the same strength that our forefathers had and say, okay, our forefathers fought Nazism before, we will have to fight this Nazism. And we will see it off just as our forefathers saw off the earlier Nazism. Hamas and their friends are Nazis, and we'll have to get rid of them. And the Israelis are doing a very good job in the beginning of that, but everyone's going to have to join in. We cannot live with these people. We can't. Not because we don't want to, but because they cannot live with us.